Hi, my name is Emily. I live in New South Wales, Australia, and these days I'm retired. Life has slowed down a lot for me now. Most of my days are quiet, just enjoying the peace of the countryside and reflecting on the different jobs I've had over the years. Out of everything I've done, the last 6 years of my working life were spent driving taxis around the rural bush. And if you've never experienced life out here in regional Australia, it has a rhythm all its own. Most of the land is farmland, which means the days start early, really early. Farmers and workers need rides into town, so I'd usually begin my shift at sunrise, driving down long stretches of dusty roads to pick people up from scattered farms or tiny towns hidden deep in the countryside. The roads themselves are mostly dirt tracks or quiet highways that seem to stretch on forever. Most of the time, the only company you have are eucalyptus trees, the occasional kangaroo, and miles of silence. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, though, it's a different story. Kangaroos have a habit of jumping out onto the road without warning, and let me tell you, when one suddenly appears in your headlights at 80 kilometers an hour, it'll scare the life out of you. Still, there's something peaceful about it. No traffic jams, no city chaos. The worst thing that might slow you down is a tractor crawling along the road, and those you can usually just pass. But because everything is so far apart out here, taxi rides can be incredibly long. A simple trip to the nearest shop might be 25 kilometers each way. With fuel prices the way they are, it's not exactly cheap to keep a cab running. Then there's the weather. The summer heat can be brutal, and during winter, thick fog sometimes rolls over the roads, making driving genuinely dangerous. But despite all of that, there's something special about living in a place like this. The sense of community is strong. Everyone knows everyone. Most passengers aren't strangers. They're neighbors, friends, or people you've been driving around for years. Sometimes, rides feel less like work and more like catching up with old friends. You pick up locals heading into town for groceries, elderly folks going to bingo nights or the pub just to have a chat, and sometimes farmers who've temporarily lost their licenses after a run-in with the drink driving laws. I've had plenty of those. Big guys in dusty boots and worn-out hats climbing into the cab for a few weeks while their ban is still in effect. Eventually, they get their license back, shake your hand, and life carries on. Tourists pass through every now and then, too. They'll ask for rides out to national parks, wineries, or scenic trails before heading back to the airport a few days later. Most days are quiet, relaxed, predictable. But that's exactly why picking up someone you've never seen before always stands out. In a place where everyone knows each other, a stranger feels unusual. And that's exactly what happened one night when I got a call to pick someone up outside a pub I'd been driving past for years. It was late. When I pulled up outside the place, a man staggered out of the front door. Right away, I assumed he was just another local who'd had a little too much to drink. He was wearing a black hoodie, dark jeans, and heavy work boots. At first, I even smiled to myself, thinking it might be someone I knew messing around after a few beers. But when he opened the back door and got into the cab, I realized I'd never seen him before in my life. So I quickly adjusted my attitude. Normally, I might joke around with someone who'd had a few drinks, something like teasing them about what their wife would say when they got home. But with a complete stranger, you have to be careful. So instead, I just gave a polite smile and said, "Good evening." Then I asked where he needed to go. He told me he was heading to a friend's house. The strange thing was, he actually didn't know the address. He said if I drove him to a certain road about 20 minutes away, he'd be able to guide me from there. Apparently, he wasn't from the area, which explained why he didn't know the roads very well. That didn't bother me. Helping people find their way around is part of the job, after all. The drive started quietly. He didn't seem interested in small talk, which was perfectly fine by me. Not every passenger wants to chat. But there was one thing that bothered me. His hood was pulled down low over his face. It was dark outside already, and I couldn't see him clearly in the rearview mirror. So eventually, I joked that the hood was making me nervous and asked if he could pull it down. To his credit, he did, but he didn't laugh at the joke. Not even a little. When he lowered the hood, I finally got a good look at him. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and a blank, almost emotionless expression. What surprised me most was how young he looked. If I had to guess, I'd say he couldn't have been older than 22, basically just a kid. He seemed moody and quiet, but nothing about him felt threatening at first. Eventually, we reached the road he'd mentioned. It was long, with houses scattered far apart along both sides. Beyond those homes, the road eventually disappeared deep into the bush. As we drove, I slowed near each driveway and asked if it was the right house. Each time he shook his head and asked me to keep going. At first, I thought it was funny. I assumed he must have been pretty drunk earlier and simply couldn't remember where his friend lived. But after passing 5 or 6 houses, something started to feel strange. I asked him if he was absolutely sure this was the right road. He mumbled something and told me to keep driving. Eventually, the houses stopped appearing altogether. Now it was just thick bushland on both sides of the road. Still, he insisted the house must be further ahead. I actually knew this road pretty well, and I was fairly certain there was nothing at the end of it. But customers are customers, so I drove all the way to the very end, where the road simply stopped in front of a wall of trees. I turned slightly in my seat and said, "Well, that's it. There's nothing here." Then I joked, "Should we turn around, or are we heading off-road?" That's when he quietly said something I didn't quite hear. So I asked him to repeat himself, and that's when he said it clearly. He wanted me to turn the engine off. He said he needed to talk. Now, taxi drivers end up acting like therapists sometimes. People share all kinds of problems during rides: relationship issues, money troubles, family drama. So at first, I assumed that's what this was, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. Still, I turned off the engine. Then I turned slightly in my seat and asked what was on his mind. He looked nervous, really nervous, so I tried to help him open up. I asked him if he'd been having dark thoughts lately. He nodded, but what he said next wasn't what I expected at all. He told me the thoughts weren't about hurting himself, they were about hurting other people. He said he'd been feeling angrier and angrier every day, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get those thoughts out of his head. Then he said something that made the air inside the car feel ice cold. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about killing someone, and that eventually he was going to do it. So I tried to talk him down. I told him he had no idea what taking a life really meant. I told him it wasn't like the movies, it wasn't dramatic or heroic, it was ugly, chaotic, terrible, and it stays with you forever. I told him the people you kill never really leave you. Their faces follow you for the rest of your life. I said that from experience, but he didn't seem convinced. He said he'd heard all those warnings before, and none of them changed how he felt. Then he said something that still makes my stomach turn when I remember it. He said he wanted to know what it felt like to cut someone open, to feel warm blood on his hands, to watch the life fade from someone's eyes, knowing he caused it. When I told him killing was chaotic and horrible, he smiled. That's when I realized something terrifying. He liked the idea of it being messy. He said he'd thought about it for so long that he couldn't ignore it anymore. Then he told me something that made my heart start pounding. He said tonight was the night he was finally going to kill someone. And for a few seconds, neither of us said anything. He just sat there staring at me, smiling, and I had the sudden, awful realization that he'd chosen me. Then everything happened very fast. He suddenly pulled a knife from inside his hoodie and lunged forward between the seats, slashing wildly towards me. But his attacks were sloppy. I leaned forward, reaching under my seat as he tried to stab me. He managed to hit my arm and side a few times, but not my neck or head. And then I pulled something from under the driver's seat. I raised it towards him. 3 loud gunshots echoed inside the cab. And just like that, it was over. Years earlier, before Australia tightened its gun laws, I'd kept a gun hand in the car for protection. And I'd also served 2 tours in East Timor during my 20s. So when I say I know what it's like to take a life, I truly do. And believe me, it's not something anyone should ever want, even when it's...
My name is Rachel, and this happened when I was 21. At the time, I was working the late shift at a small gas station just outside a quiet town. It wasn't a big place, just a couple of fuel pumps out front, a convenience store inside, and a long, empty highway stretching out in both directions. Most nights were slow. The station sat far enough from town that we didn't get much traffic after midnight. Usually it was just truck drivers stopping for coffee or the occasional traveler filling up before continuing down the highway. I actually didn't mind the quiet. I'd bring a book with me or listen to podcasts while I worked the register. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me, and outside the big glass windows you could see the pumps glowing under the yellow canopy lights. But one night changed the way I look at late shifts forever. It was a little after 1:30 in the morning when a pickup truck pulled into the station. I noticed it right away because there hadn't been any customers for nearly 40 minutes. The truck rolled slowly toward the pumps before stopping near pump number 2. It was an older model, dark blue, maybe early 2000s, with rust spots around the wheel wells. A man stepped out of the driver's side. He looked to be in his mid-30s, tall, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. At first, there was nothing particularly strange about him. People stopped for gas all the time, but something about the way he moved caught my attention. He kept glancing around the empty station like he was checking to see if anyone else was there. Of course, I was the only one working that night. He didn't start pumping gas right away either. Instead, he walked straight toward the front doors of the store. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. I gave him the usual polite smile. "Evening." He didn't smile back. He just nodded slightly and walked down one of the aisles. I watched him on the security monitor while pretending to organize the counter. He wandered around for a minute or two, picking up random items, then putting them back down. Finally, he grabbed a bottle of soda and brought it to the counter. When he placed it down, his hand lingered on the counter for a moment. That's when I noticed something odd. His hand was shaking. Not just a little tremble either. It was a noticeable, nervous shake. I asked if he wanted anything else. He said no. His voice was low and rough, like someone who hadn't slept much. As I rang up the soda, I tried making casual conversation the way I usually did with late-night customers. "Pretty quiet out there tonight," I said. He nodded again. "Yeah, that was it. Just one word." He paid in cash, took the soda, and headed back outside. I watched him through the window as he returned to his truck. Instead of pumping gas, though, he just stood there for nearly a minute, looking around the empty parking lot. Then he climbed back into the truck and drove away. I shrugged it off and went back to my book. But about 20 minutes later, the same truck pulled back into the station. This time, it parked closer to the building. My stomach tightened a little when I saw it. The man stepped out again and walked back inside. The bell rang over the door. "Back again?" I said, trying to sound friendly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the store. Then he walked up to the counter. "Do you work here alone?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, tonight I am." His eyes drifted toward the large glass windows behind me. The parking lot outside was completely empty. No other cars, no passing headlights, just darkness beyond the station lights. He leaned slightly closer to the counter. "You ever get scared working here at night?" I forced a small laugh.
"Not really," I said. That wasn't entirely true. Working alone in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. could definitely feel creepy sometimes, but I wasn't about to admit that to a stranger. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You should be." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't sure how to respond. Then he suddenly smiled, a thin, unsettling smile. "Just kidding," he said. He grabbed another soda from the cooler near the counter and placed it down. I rang it up quickly. This time, he paid and left without another word. I watched him carefully as he walked outside. Instead of getting into his truck right away, he stood near the pumps again, staring toward the building, toward me. Eventually, he climbed back into the driver's seat, but the truck didn't start moving. It just sat there, engine idling. My heart started beating faster. Something about the situation didn't feel right, so I quietly reached beneath the counter and pressed the small silent alarm button that connected directly to the police. I didn't know if the guy had done anything illegal yet, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. A few minutes passed. The truck was still sitting there. Then suddenly, the driver's door opened again. The man stepped out, and this time he walked toward the store with a determined look on his face. When he pushed the door open, the bell rang loudly. But instead of browsing the aisles, he walked straight toward the counter. And that's when I noticed something in his hand. A knife. He pointed it directly at me. "Open the register," he said. My hands started shaking, but I tried to stay calm. I opened the register slowly. He leaned over the counter, watching every movement. "Put the money in the bag." I grabbed a plastic bag and started placing the cash inside. While I did, I kept glancing toward the highway behind him, praying that a car would pass by. But the road stayed empty, completely silent. When the bag was full, I slid it across the counter. He grabbed it quickly, then he looked at me again. For a moment, I thought he was going to leave. But instead, he stepped around the counter. My heart nearly stopped. He was inside the employee area now, only a few feet away. "Turn around," he said quietly. I froze. Every instinct told me something terrible was about to happen. But just as he took another step toward me, red and blue lights suddenly flashed through the front windows. The police. 2 patrol cars pulled into the station at the same time. The man's eyes widened. He spun around and bolted toward the door, but officers were already rushing inside. They tackled him to the ground before he could even reach the parking lot. Later, one of the officers told me something that still gives me chills. Apparently, the man had been driving around the area all night looking for a place to rob. But that wasn't the worst part. When they searched his truck, they found duct tape, rope, and several more knives. The officer told me quietly that pressing the silent alarm probably saved my life. I quit that job a week later, and even now, whenever I pass a lonely gas station late at night, I still remember the way that man looked at me when he asked if I was scared.
I've worked as a 911 dispatcher for a little over 6 years now. Most people think the job is just answering phones and sending police or ambulances where they need to go, but it's a lot more intense than that. Every call could be someone's worst moment. Sometimes it's a car accident, sometimes it's a break-in, sometimes it's someone who just needs help breathing. But every once in a while, you get a call that doesn't make any sense. The one I'm about to talk about happened on a quiet Tuesday night. I remember because the shift had been unusually calm. It was just after 2 in the morning and most of the city was asleep. The dispatch room was dimly lit except for the glow of computer screens. You could hear keyboards clicking and the occasional radio chatter from patrol units. Then my phone line lit up. I answered like I always do. 911, what's your emergency? For a second, there was only silence. Then I heard breathing. Slow, shaky breathing. "Hello?" I said again. 911, can you tell me what's going on? A woman finally spoke, but her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think someone's in my house." That sentence alone already raises alarms for us. Home intrusion calls are serious. I immediately started pulling up the call information on my screen. "Okay," I told her calmly. "Stay on the line with me. What's your address?" She gave it to me, voice trembling the entire time. I typed it in and immediately dispatched 2 patrol units to the location. "All right," I told her. "Officers are on their way. Are you somewhere safe right now?" "I'm in my bedroom," she said quietly. "The door is locked." "Good," I said. "Stay there. Don't leave the room." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing again. Then she whispered something that made my stomach tighten. "I heard footsteps in the hallway." I kept my voice steady, even though my pulse was starting to rise. "Okay, just stay calm. The officers are about 5 minutes away." Then I heard it too, through the phone, a faint creak, like a floorboard shifting under someone's weight. The woman immediately started breathing faster. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Yes," I said quietly. "I heard it. Someone's here." I checked the patrol units on my screen. They were still about 3 minutes out. "Stay with me," I told her. "Do not unlock the door." Then we both heard it again, another slow step, then another. It sounded like someone walking slowly down the hallway toward her bedroom. The woman started crying quietly. "Oh my God, oh my God." "Listen to me," I said. "The officers are almost there. Just stay quiet." Then something happened that completely threw me off. A man's voice suddenly came through the phone, but it wasn't loud. It sounded distant, almost muffled. "Hello?" I froze. The woman gasped. "That's not me," she whispered urgently. "That's not me." My heart started pounding. "Ma'am," said I carefully, "is there anyone else in the house with you?" "No," she whispered. "I live alone." Then the voice spoke again. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" It sounded confused, lost. But here's the thing. The voice wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming through the phone line, almost like the call had suddenly connected to someone else. The woman started panicking. "What is that?" "I'm not sure," I said honestly. Then the man's voice spoke again. "I think someone's in my house." The exact same sentence the woman had said earlier. My entire body went cold. "Sir," I said quickly, "this is 911. Can you give me your address?" There was a pause. Then he gave me the exact same address the woman had just given me. The woman started crying harder. "That's my house! That's my address!" Now I had two voices on the same line, both claiming someone was inside their house, both giving the same address. I checked the patrol units again. They were pulling up to the house right now. Then, suddenly, over the phone, we all heard something, a loud bang, like a door being forced open. The woman screamed. "What was that?" The man's voice also shouted at the same time, "Who's there?" And then the line went completely silent. No breathing, no voices, nothing. Just dead air. A second later, the officers radioed in. "Dispatch, we're on scene." I immediately asked them to check inside the house. They forced the front door open and cleared the rooms one by one. Living room, kitchen, hallway, bedroom. But when they got to the bedroom, the room was empty. No woman, no man, no sign that anyone had even been there. The only strange thing they found was a phone sitting on the floor, still connected to the 911 call. And when they checked the call logs later, they discovered something even stranger. The call had only come from one number, not two. To this day, none of us at the dispatch center have been able to explain what happened that night, but I still remember hearing those two voices on the same line, both terrified, both claiming someone was inside the same house. And sometimes when I'm working late shifts, I swear I still hear that same line echo in my head. I think someone's in my house. I used to work the overnight shift at a gas station just outside a small town. It wasn't exactly a busy place, especially after midnight. Most of the time it was just long stretches of silence, broken occasionally by someone stopping for gas or a truck driver coming in for coffee. The station sat right off a quiet highway, surrounded by fields and patches of woods. During the day, it felt normal enough, but at night, it always felt a little different. When you're alone in a place like that at 3 in the morning, every little noise seems louder than it should be. This happened about a year into working there.
It was sometime around 2:45 a.m. The night had been completely uneventful. I was behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, while the security cameras played on the monitor above the register. Outside, the parking lot was empty. No cars, no headlights on the road, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the quiet buzz of the refrigerators behind me. Then, the door chime rang. I looked up automatically, but no one walked in. I frowned and leaned forward slightly, expecting someone to step through the door. Nothing. The door was still closed. For a second, I thought maybe it had glitched. That happened sometimes when the wind pushed the door just enough to trigger the sensor. Still, something about it felt strange. I glanced up at the security monitor. The outside camera showed the front entrance clearly, and there was no one there. I shrugged it off and went back to my phone. About 10 minutes passed. Then the door chime rang again. This time I looked up immediately. Again, no one. The door hadn't opened. Now it started to feel a little unsettling. I stood up from the stool behind the counter and walked around to the front door, checking the handle. It was locked, just like it should have been. At night, we kept it locked, and customers had to knock so I could buzz them in. I stepped outside for a second and looked around the parking lot. Still empty. The highway in front of the station stretched out in both directions, completely dark, not a single car in sight. I went back inside and locked the door again. At this point, I was starting to convince myself the sensor was just acting up. Then, I heard something else. A knock. 3 slow knocks on the glass door. I froze. I looked up, but again, there was no one standing there. The glass door reflected the bright lights from inside the store, making it hard to see outside clearly, so I leaned closer, trying to look past the reflection. Still, nothing. The parking lot was completely empty. Now, my stomach started to twist, because I knew what I heard. Someone had knocked 3 times. I stepped back slowly and glanced up at the security cameras again. Every camera angle showed the same thing. The pumps, the parking lot, the entrance. Empty. No people, no cars, nothing. For a moment, I actually considered calling my manager just to ask if the door sensor had been malfunctioning recently. But before I could pick up the phone, the door handle suddenly rattled, hard, like someone was trying to force it open. I jumped back. My heart started racing instantly. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. No response. The handle rattled again, then stopped. For a few seconds, everything was quiet again. Then I heard something that made my entire body go cold. A voice, right outside the door, soft, almost whispering. "Please, let me in." I slowly walked closer to the door, trying to see through the glass. But the lights inside the store made it almost impossible to see anything outside. All I could see was my own reflection staring back at me. "Who's there?" I asked. The voice spoke again, still soft, still calm. "Please, I just need help." Something about the voice felt wrong. I can't really explain it. It sounded normal, but at the same time, there was something unsettling about the way it spoke. I glanced up at the security monitor again. Still, no one. The entrance camera clearly showed the door, and there was no person standing there. At this point, I felt a wave of panic creeping in. "Sir, I can't open the door," I said loudly. "You need to step in front of the camera." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the voice spoke again, this time a little closer, almost right against the glass. "You can't see me?" My chest tightened. "No," I said honestly. Then the voice whispered something that made me step back immediately. "That's because I'm not outside." I felt my stomach drop because the voice didn't sound like it was coming through the door anymore. It sounded like it was inside the store, somewhere behind me. I slowly turned around. The aisles were empty. The refrigerators hummed quietly. Everything looked exactly the same as it had a few seconds earlier, but the store suddenly felt different, like I wasn't alone anymore. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed 911. While the phone rang, I kept staring down the aisles, half expecting someone to step out from behind the shelves, but nothing moved. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what was happening. They sent a patrol car immediately. The longest 5 minutes of my life followed. I stood behind the counter gripping my phone, watching the cameras and the aisles at the same time. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Until the door chime rang again. This time, the door actually opened, and a police officer stepped inside. I almost burst into tears from relief. They checked the entire building, the storage room, the bathrooms, every aisle, every corner. But just like the cameras showed, the store was completely empty. No one had been inside, no one had been outside. Nothing. For a moment, I actually considered calling my manager just to ask if the door sensor had been malfunctioning recently. But before I could pick up the phone, the door handle suddenly rattled, hard, like someone was trying to force it open. I jumped back. My heart started racing instantly. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. No response. The handle rattled again, then stopped. For a few seconds, everything was quiet again. Then I heard something that made my entire body go cold. A voice, right outside the door, soft, almost whispering, "Please, let me in." I slowly walked closer to the door, trying to see through the glass, but the lights inside the store made it almost impossible to see anything outside. All I could see was my own reflection staring back at me. "Who's there?" I asked. The voice spoke again, still soft, still calm. "Please, I just need help." Something about the voice felt wrong. I can't really explain it. It sounded normal, but at the same time, there was something unsettling about the way it spoke. I glanced up at the security monitor again. Still, no one. The entrance camera clearly showed the door, and there was no person standing there. At this point, I felt a wave of panic creeping in. "Sir, I can't open the door," I said loudly. "You need to step in front of the camera." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the voice spoke again, this time a little closer, almost right against the glass. "You can't see me?" My chest tightened. "No," I said honestly. Then the voice whispered something that made me step back immediately. "That's because I'm not outside." I felt my stomach drop because the voice didn't sound like it was coming through the door anymore. It sounded like it was inside the store, somewhere behind me. I slowly turned around. The aisles were empty. The refrigerators hummed quietly. Everything looked exactly the same as it had a few seconds earlier, but the store suddenly felt different, like I wasn't alone anymore. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed 911. While the phone rang, I kept staring down the aisles, half expecting someone to step out from behind the shelves, but nothing moved. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what was happening. They sent a patrol car immediately. The longest 5 minutes of my life followed. I stood behind the counter gripping my phone, watching the cameras and the aisles at the same time. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Until the door chime rang again. This time, the door actually opened, and a police officer stepped inside. I almost burst into tears from relief. They checked the entire building, the storage room, the bathrooms, every aisle, every corner. But just like the cameras showed, the store was completely empty. No one had been inside, no one had been outside. Nothing. For a moment, I actually considered calling my manager just to ask if the door sensor had been malfunctioning recently. But before I could pick up the phone, the door handle suddenly rattled, hard, like someone was trying to force it open. I jumped back. My heart started racing instantly. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. No response. The handle rattled again, then stopped. For a few seconds, everything was quiet again. Then I heard something that made my entire body go cold. A voice, right outside